and welcome on board Polar Steel, where we have been racking up nautical miles at a pretty fast pace lately. Back in 2019, Ryan and I did our first Atlantic crossing that took us from Europe to the Caribbean via the Canary Islands and Cape Verde. We are currently in the Azores, where we have been crossing the Atlantic again, this time from Bonaire via Bermuda, and we are gearing up for a third crossing back to the Caribbean via the Canary Islands and Cape Verde. During our first Atlantic crossing, we found out that there were a few things on Polar Steel that needed to be optimized, and this time around we feel that we have reached this sweet spot where Polar Steel is both self-sufficient and really comfortable to cross oceans. And so today I wanted to talk about the equipment choices that we made for Polar Steel for our first Atlantic crossing, what we did different for our second, and what we are thinking about changing for the third. A bit of a disclaimer before we start. This is a video about how we chose to equip our boat for ocean passages. In no way am I saying that this is how all boats should be equipped. Those are our choices, and I know that a lot of sailors would make different choices. Our boat, Polar Steel, is a Beneteau Oceanis 40 from 2007, and it is considered to be an entry-range, more modern production boat. And I can already see the comment section saying that our boat was not built to cross oceans. And so at the end of the video, I really want to address it, and I will be giving you my thoughts about blue water sailing boats and our personal take on taking production boats across oceans. So stay tuned to hear our thoughts. And first off, let's talk about sails. When we ordered our new mainsail in 2018 before leaving the dock in Stockholm, we had a third reef put in the mainsail. A reef is a system with lines and pulleys that allows you to take in and out more or less sail. So typically when the wind is above 15 knots, we'll have at least one reef. Above 20 knots, we will have two reefs. And above 25 knots, we may consider taking a third reef in the mainsail. The third reef is really deep, and what it does is giving us a tiny little bit of mainsail to stabilize the boat in really heavy weather, and it's come in handy quite a few times. Then we have our head sails. We have tried a couple of different head sail setups over the years. For our first Atlantic crossing, we had two Genoas. That system was okay, but we also knew that in the long term, it was not going to work very well. It was a little bit heavy, so difficult in light winds, and also it was a bit clunky and not completely ideal for the two people that we were on board at the time. So we always told ourselves that we were going to invest in a proper downwind sail, a spinnaker or an asymmetric spinnaker, if we were going to cross another ocean. Now, on our crossing from Bonaire to the Azores, we knew that a third of the way was going to be upwind, meaning that the wind would come in front of us. And sailing upwind can be tricky because if you have too much sail out, it can overpower the boat. And in the best case, it's uncomfortable, but in the worst case, it can be quite dangerous. So for that passage, we knew that we needed a jib. Our boat came with a jib. It's a lot smaller, it's also easier to reef, and it helps us catch a better angle to the wind when the wind comes straight in front of us. With our jib going upwind, we felt that we had the perfect setup. We always kept two reefs in the main, so the main never needed to be reefed, and we could reef the jib in and out, which was really easy to do with only one person. The only problem is that our jib is 15 years old and it's lost its shape and it really needs a replacement. Right, so the other 2/3 of the way from Bonaire to the Azores, we knew that we were going to be sailing downwind and that we would encounter some light winds. And so for that, we really wanted to have a proper downwind sail. We have a Gennaker on board, but while our jib is vintage, our Gennaker is antique. It is from the 90s. I think that at some point it was white, but it works, but it does really need a replacement. Almost as important as our sails is our rigging, which is our mast, the shrouds, and that entire system that helps the sail sail. Because a lot of the sailing that we do when we cross ocean is downwind, we need to have a good system on the boat to make sure that the boom is secured on the side of the boat that she is, because when we have the wind behind us, the wind can catch the sail and violently push it onto the other side of the boat, which can be really, really bad for the rigging. And so for that, Ryan installed a system called a boom preventer system.
To rig the preventer on Polar Steel, we've done a few things. So first is we have this Dyneema line that goes all the way back to the end of the boom, and then here we've got a friction ring or frictionless ring. And so this is permanently attached to the boom, and it just goes here. And then what we usually do is then have a line that goes from the deck all the way up to the bow cleat and then goes back to the cockpit. So what we can do is before we leave on passage, we'll have 2 preventer lines, one on each side. So we have everything rigged up so you don't have to go forward of the mast. Everything can be done after the mast, and all you do is take the preventer line, run it through this ring, tie a bowline on it, and you can control the preventer from the cockpit. The only time you need to come forward is if you need to jibe. Then you need to release this, put it on the other side, and pass it over. Polar Seal has a rig where the spreaders are swept backwards. One of the disadvantages is if the forestay breaks, that mast is going to come down fairly quickly. So one thing that we do when we're offshore is we put this forestay, extra forestay in place. And it has 2 purposes. One, it acts as a backup in case the mainstay breaks. And the second thing it does is our storm jib, so the sail that we would fly in very heavy weather, and that hangs on to this stay, so it has little clips that you clip on and we can just pull it up. So if bad weather would come, this stay is already in place.
Another critical piece of equipment for us when we cross oceans, and even when we sail offshore, and even when we sail period, is the autopilot. Hand steering is only really romantic for a couple of hours at a time, and with the type of sailing that we do, we almost never hand steer, except when we come in and out of ports or when we maneuver. Apart from that, the autopilot is constantly running. If our autopilot were to fail while in the middle of the ocean, this could mean weeks of hand steering, and because Ryan and I typically only sail the boat, the 2 of us, it's like a full crew member that we lose, and we cannot let that happen. So on board Polar Seal, we have a dual autopilot system. So before we crossed the Atlantic the first time, Ryan bought a brand new autopilot, a little more modern Raymarine Evolution. And what he did was to keep the old autopilot and install the new autopilot on top of that. If the new autopilot were to fail, we could flip a switch and go back on the old autopilot. Now the downside of our autopilot is that it uses a lot of power, and especially in ocean sailing settings, because the sea state can sometimes be really hard for the autopilot to correct. On our first Atlantic crossing, the first week was really hard. We had this really gnarly sea state that took the boat from one side to the other, and our autopilot was constantly working. But on top of that, we had a really thick overcast of clouds that would prevent our solar panels from charging our batteries. To solution this, we could have gone 2 routes. We could have gone the route of using less power and installed a self-steering system that doesn't use any electricity, such as a hydrovane. But Ryan, being the battery nerd that he is, we went the other route, which is that we installed another source of power to charge our batteries in case we have big clouds. On board Polar Seal, we have 680 amp-hour of lithium batteries from Dakota Lithium. To charge our batteries, we have 800 watts of solar panels, which normally keeps them topped up. During our first Atlantic crossing, we had 2 ways of charging the batteries. The first one was these 800 watts of solar panels that I talked about, and the second one was the alternator.
One of the things we noticed on our first Atlantic crossing is that our alternator did not produce enough power to meet our needs underway. And what I mean by that is, as we were going, we would use anywhere between 15 to 20 amps, depending on how hard the autopilot was working and if we were sailing at night and the chart plotters were lit. That's a lot of power over a 24-hour period. So if we had to run our alternator to top up those batteries, it just wasn't producing enough. So one of the upgrades we made was we put this high output alternator on Polar Seal. So instead of getting 40 amps maybe at most out of the alternator, we can get up to 120 or 130 amps. And what that did for us was it allowed us to run the engine maybe every other day for 1 hour instead of every other day for 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. It saves our sanity because the tractor isn't running, but it also saves fuel, and that's great.
One piece of kit that we did not specifically buy to cross ocean, but I wouldn't cross an ocean without, is our water maker. During our first Atlantic crossing, we could not run the water maker. This time around, with all that power, we were able to run the water maker every day. We were able to take showers every day, clean our dishes, clean the boat, and it was just so much more comfortable. than when we couldn't have the water maker the first time. In terms of our navigation equipment, we have 2 chart plotters on board. We have this EAT series, one in the cabin at the chart table and another one in the cockpit. Those chart plotters help us with GPS to see where we are going. But this is also where we see our radar. The radar has helped us dodging squalls when we were sailing between Bonaire and Bermuda. And we have AIS, both receiver and transponder. Having AIS going offshore is great because you can see information about other boats, such as their name, what type of boat they are, their MMSI number, and it makes calling them on the radio so much easier. Also, on our latest Atlantic crossing between Bermuda and the Azores, we lost our satellite communications, meaning that our live tracker on our website went down. We were worried that a lot of people would worry about us, but thanks to our AIS and the satellite signal, people were able to see that we were still moving forward, making progress, and things seemed to be fine. So thank God for AIS. And talking about satellite communication, this is something that we will be doing different the third time around, and I will explain why. Good morning. It is 4 a.m. 5 minutes ago, Ryan came to wake me up and told me that we have lost our satellite communications. Satellite communications when we go across an ocean is super important for us because this is how we receive our weather forecast. This is also how we stay in touch with our source reports, and this is how we would call a doctor in case we would have a medical emergency. On board Polyseal, we do not have an SSB radio. They're a little bit expensive. The install would be a little bit of a pain. We decided to go another route, and the route that we decided to go was to purchase this Iridium Go through PredictWind that we have been super happy with until halfway between Bermuda and the Azores. It failed. When our satellite communications failed, we had a backup inReach. The inReach is a satellite tracker device that allows you to send SMSs. If we were offshore for only 5 to 8... Oh, hi there. You're talking now. If we were only... He's really talking, but not talking enough. If we were only going offshore for 5 to 8 days, having the Iridium Go die on us would not be a problem because our latest forecast would still be good for the rest of the time we need to be at sea. When this failed in the middle of the Atlantic, we still had at least a week to go. The problem is that our inReach was not activated, and to activate the inReach, you need to have internet. How we managed to reactivate the inReach while being completely disconnected from the rest of the world is a long one. It will come in the coming videos. It's on our blog if you are curious about the details. We will have the inReach activated before we go. So we will have both the Iridium and the inReach in case something happens. Alright, so now let's talk about the small things that we did to improve the comfort on board Polyseal when we crossed ocean. One of our very first upgrades on Polyseal was to install this full cockpit enclosure that keeps the cockpit dry. At that time we mostly did it because we were sailing in Sweden, but now that we have done 2 ocean crossings, it is so nice to have the ability to put the wall up to block the wind. It keeps the cockpit dry, a lot warmer, and everything that makes the crew more comfortable on an ocean crossing makes the passage so much easier on everyone. And 1 extra % of comfort on a crossing makes such a huge difference. Because an ocean crossing is a passage that is longer than a week, having good refrigeration on board is so important. So before our first Atlantic crossing, we transformed one of our ice boxes into another fridge. And before our second crossing, we transformed that second fridge into a freezer. That freezer has been such an amazing addition to the equipment that we have on board in terms of the comfort that it brought to our boat. We did it once without. Now that I have a freezer, there is no going back. There is no going back. So I know that a lot of you will have watched this video and be like, Beneteau Oceanis 40 across an ocean, what is this? So I really want to talk about ocean-going blue water sailboats and the idea that our boat is not built to cross oceans. I think it's crap. We bought our boat so that it would be a comfortable cruising boat because we do not cross oceans all the time, except this year. This year is a bit of an anomaly. But with that said, our boat is absolutely built to sustain ocean crossings. If you look at what type of boat crosses the Atlantic every year, it's not the older chunky blue water sailing type boats. It's boat like ours, Beneteau, Oceanis, Hanse, and you don't even have to take my word for it. You can just look at the statistics from the Atlantic Rally for cruisers, and if you still think that you couldn't take a boat like ours across an ocean, just remember that people have crossed the Atlantic in literally anything. Rowing boats, windsurfs, cars, barrels, you name it, they've done it. And as long as you are well prepared and you know the risk that you are taking, then I mean, who can tell you what you can cross an ocean in or not? So I really do not subscribe to the whole blue water sailboat idea, because at the end of the day, the ability of a boat to cross an ocean comes down to our owner's mindset, skills, and knowledge. So instead of talking about blue water sailboats, I wish that we talked about blue water mindset and instead discussed seamanship, preparation, equipment, and risk management, because this is how you will get a safe and comfortable passage, not by buying a particular type of boat. Alright guys, I know that some of you are really waiting to see the footage of our crossing between Bonaire and the Azores, and trust me, after 2 months of producing almost no video, I am so excited to get at it. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell button to receive a notification when we publish a new video, because the ones that will be published in the coming month are... Our crew arrives in a little over 3 hours, and this is how the boat looks.
Okay.
These are my warm clothes because we've been spending some time in the tropic, but that time is over, so I'm gonna need all of this.